Hello and welcome everyone. I'm going to give folks a moment to just trickle in. Hello and welcome. We'll give folks about 30 more seconds to get started. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Katharine Lusk. I serve as the co-director of the Boston University Initiative on Cities, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you today on behalf of our team at Boston University, as well as our partner, the Trust for Public Land. And I'd also like to say welcome on behalf of City Community Investing and Development and the Rockefeller Foundation, with whom we work closely on the research I'm going to share today. So you'll hear first from me. I'm going to share findings from our latest Menino Survey of Mayors, a report we just published within the last month. And then we're going to turn it over to Diane, who's joining us from the Trust for Public Land, and Mayor Libby Schaaf from Oakland, and Mayor Byron Brown from Buffalo. I also want to say a special welcome to the mayors today. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to host you. So let's get started. So first, findings from us. The Menino Survey of Mayors, a quick word of background. The Menino Survey is an annual survey of American mayors, which our team at Boston University initiated in 2014. It has earned multi-year support from City Community Investing and Development and the Rockefeller Foundation, and we were particularly pleased to get additional support and partnership this year with the Trust for Public Land to sponsor the report that I'm about to share. It is the only nationally representative and scientifically rigorous survey of American mayors, and the 2020 survey, which I'll share, is based on interviews with 130 mayors of cities with populations of more than 75,000 residents. And the interviews were conducted in the summer of 2020, which I'll draw attention to in a couple important places. I also have to say thank you to the Menino Survey team. It takes a village to make this project happen every year. Special thanks to professors of political science, Katie Levine-Einstein, David Glick, Max Palmer. A particular thanks to our Associate Director, Stacy Fox, and doctoral students Song Young Park, Nick Henninger, Luisa Godinez-Pugh, and Felicia Haycoop. So let's jump in. So I'm going to try to answer 3 questions in the next 10 minutes or so. The first is, how do mayors across the country perceive park access and equity in their cities? Second, how, if at all, have they worked to create new public space during the COVID-19 pandemic? And lastly, in post-COVID and our post-COVID future, as we enter into that period, what changes do they foresee in the parks and public realm? So first, we were really interested in getting a sense of mayors' perceptions of both access and safety and quality of green space in their communities. And what we found through our interviews is that mayors overwhelmingly believe their parks are safe and accessible to all, including during the pandemic, but they recognize important inequity in quality of green spaces. So we asked mayors to agree or disagree with a series of statements, starting with this one. And we heard that 70% of mayors believe their residents live within easy walking distance to green space, irrespective of race, ethnicity, or income. We also heard 77% of mayors say that their residents are able to safely use green space near their homes, again, irrespective of race, ethnicity, or income. 78% believe Black residents in their community are able to safely use green space without fear of police. And an overwhelming majority, 85%, say that all residents could safely enjoy outdoor recreation during the pandemic. So as measures of access, you hear both proximity as one measure of access, but also how welcoming a space may be, both to different types of users, and then public safety is also an important measure of how welcoming and accessible a space is. But there was an important distinction. Oh, sorry, one more point on this. 84% of mayors also told us that decisions about where to invest in parks and green space are fair and equitably distributed, again, irrespective of race, ethnicity, and income. But the most important distinction we heard was with regard to quality. Only 40% of mayors believe that the quality of green space is the same in all neighborhoods. So generally they'll say, yes, all of our residents can walk somewhere. Yes, wherever they go, they feel safe and welcome, but there are important inequities in the quality of spaces that they can access. And we know from the data provided by the Trust for Public Land, parks serving primarily communities of color are actually half the size and serve 5 times more people per acre than parks in primarily white neighborhoods. And we heard from a couple, not an overwhelming majority, but a couple of mayors who say, actually, no, the distribution of resources is not equitable, because what we're trying to do is overinvest in neighborhoods that have historically seen less investment from the city. So this first mayor from the Midwest said we overinvest in areas with higher concentration of poverty and strive to make green space the best in those areas. And another mayor on the East Coast, who said, I know park quality is not equitable, which is why we supported a tax increase to fund parks and an equity-driven parks master plan. But we want to also draw attention to the fact that we saw important distinction based on the region of the country that the mayor came from. So Northeast cities, mayors in Northeast cities were most likely to report strong walk access and most likely to report inequity in park quality. So I said about 70% of mayors agrees that their residents have easy walk access. The numbers are slightly higher in the Northeast, with 79% of mayors agreeing, and they're actually lower in the South, with only 58% of mayors agreeing that their residents have easy walk access. And overwhelmingly, both groups actually believe that there's inequity in the quality of the spaces that their residents can access, if they can access them. 69% of mayors in the Northeast disagreed or strongly disagreed that parks and green spaces are equitable across neighborhoods. Sometimes we ground truth mayors' responses, so we actually look for data from the real world to understand how do mayors' perceptions of their communities match up with the reality. And what we see here is actually data that was made available to us by the Trust for Public Land. And it's their 10-minute walk access for all cities, over 400 cities across the country, with a population of more than 75,000 residents. And what you see here is a really important distinction based on where you live, how likely you are to have walkable access to parks and green space. And on average, residents in southern cities, just 44% of them live within a 10-minute walk of a park or green space, compared to, on average, 81% of residents in Northeast cities. Now, we were also interested, as I mentioned, in the extent to which mayors were reallocating public space during the pandemic. And you see here a great quote from a mayor, and we thought we would hear a lot of this, right? There's been a lot of media stories and coverage of the ways in which mayors and cities across the country are repurposing the public realm. Here we had a mayor on the East Coast say, we have an amazing opportunity to create more public space. Public spaces are an important part of the character of our city. Fewer cars means more opportunities for public space. We're learning a lot about how to share public space and not just use it for cars. And we worked to close roadways, and now people want to keep them. Now, I will confess, we thought we would hear this from every mayor in every city across the country, but the reality was actually a bit different than what the media headlines were portraying. So overwhelmingly, mayors were reallocating public space for outdoor dining. So this is an area where you see there's an economic imperative, right? They wanted to create safe outdoor space for people to gather, and outdoor dining allowed them to support an important small business in their community, their restaurants. So 92% of mayors created new outdoor space for outdoor dining, but just under half closed some roads to through traffic. So mostly the things we asked about, widening sidewalks, creating new bike lanes, closing some roads to all traffic, really repurposing the public realm for human-centered uses, was happening actually in the minority of cities, not the majority of cities. And even in the places where it was taking place, the story, interestingly, was one mostly of temporary, not permanent changes. So a third of mayors, the change most likely to endure after the pandemic, is this reallocation of space for outdoor dining. And what we're most interested now to see is the extent to which where the changes have been taking place, and there's new demand and understanding and appreciation for this reallocation of the public realm for recreation, for children to play, for families to gather. We're curious to see the extent to which constituents now actually pressure mayors to hang on to some of those new uses. And one of the reasons that we might hear more of this pressure is because of this point. Now, we asked mayors what changes do they anticipate to resident behavior after we emerge from the pandemic. 3 out of 4 mayors expect residents to visit parks more frequently than they did before COVID-19. And 2/3 or more believe their residents will actually be walking and cycling more. all of which suggest there will be even more demand for high quality public spaces. However, fiscal realities remain. So we asked mayors, in which of the following areas, which you see noted on the right, do they expect to make or see dramatic financial cuts to their community? Now, this is not just trimming them out around the margin, right? We really wanted to see where, unfortunately, do you foresee really significant budget cuts? The first one was schools, surprisingly, and the second was parks and recreation. Over a third of mayors expected dramatic cuts to their parks and recreation budget. But here's an important distinction that I'll say is that we were doing these interviews in the summer of 2020. And so perhaps the mayors will tell us today the extent to which the American Rescue Plan and new federal supports might help them offset some of these anticipated cuts. So quick summary, a majority of mayors believe all their residents live within easy walking distance of a park. However, many acknowledge and understand the inequity in quality across different neighborhoods. Southern city residents are significantly less likely to live within a 10-minute walk of a park or green space on average relative to residents in the Northeast. The most popular change to the public realm during the pandemic, and the one most likely to endure, as far as we know, was outdoor dining. And lastly, mayors expect COVID-19 to permanently change some resident behavior, particularly in relation to spending more time outdoors in public spaces. Now, I shared a very quick summary of findings. I encourage you to go to surveyofmayors.com. You can read the full report, which also includes some terrific case studies authored by our partners at the Trust for Public Land. I'm not going to take Q&A today, so we get more time with the mayors, but my email address, klusk@bu.edu, is here, and I welcome questions from everyone. Great. I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to introduce Diane Regis with a quick bio. So Diane is an internationally recognized outdoor equity and environmental justice leader who joined the Trust for Public Land in the spring of 2018 as president and CEO. Prior to the Trust for Public Land, she worked for more than a decade at the Environmental Defense Fund, most recently as executive director, where she helped EDF advance solutions that promote prosperity for all people and for the planet. She previously served at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, working under both Democratic and Republican administrations as the top civil servant protecting our nation's rivers, lakes, and bays. And Diane, I turn it over to you, and thank you so much for your partnership and collaboration, and thank you so much to Mayor Brown and Mayor Schaaf for joining us today.
Great, thanks, Katharine. Really love the work that you all are doing and appreciate the insights that comes from the Menino Survey. And we're going to get quickly to conversation with the mayors. That's who we all want to hear from. Now, for everyone listening, if you have a question for the mayors anytime during the presentation, please go ahead and add it to the Q&A. You just click on the Q&A function. If you're using a PC, it's at the bottom of your screen, and type in your question. We'll try to get as many questions as we can. So I'm excited to have these wonderful rising to national prominence mayors with us today. This year has proven a couple of important things, but one of them is that parks are not just a nice to have. Parks are absolutely necessary. As Americans endured the health impacts, the economic challenges, the isolation brought on by the pandemic, the fight for racial justice, outdoors became a lifeline for all of us. So local parks saw a dramatic uptick in their usage as people just sought to get outside, get some exercise, maybe sit calmly under a tree, make some connections with their friends and family, and just restore. Parks served as venues for everything from meal distributions to COVID tests and vaccinations, gathering spaces for protests and mourning. And mayors understand better than anybody the roles that parks can play. Now, if you live within a walking distance of a park, you can safely get outside quickly for exercise, social gatherings, school programs, and more. But if you were one of the 100 million people in this country, including 28 million kids who don't have a park close to home, it means there's too many people vying for the same small patch of access to quality parks. And our data around access to quality parks show that it's too often the case for low-income neighborhoods, communities of color that don't have access to quality parks. And those are the same neighborhoods that have been hit so hard by COVID. At the Trust for Public Land, we are all about closing that park equity divide. How do we know it exists? Because we measure it. Through our research, we know that parks serving primarily communities of color are half the size and serve 5 times more people per acre than parks in white neighborhoods. And because cities are a vital part of infrastructure, they serve health, climate, community connection needs. Mayor Schaaf and Mayor Brown are with us in seeing day to day how essential these are. So that's why the Trust for Public Land is leading a coalition of over 200 groups, including Outdoor Afro, the Sierra Club, REI, to push for a one-time historic $500 million public investment in parks and equity. We had a wonderful point last month when the Parks, Jobs, and Equity Act was introduced in Congress on a bipartisan basis. Parks, public lands, conservation, getting outdoors is something that Republicans and Democrats can agree on. So we're excited about that progress. It's also our commitment to closing the park equity divide is also why next month, just about a month from now, we're going to release our annual Park Score Index. It lets you know where each of the top 100 cities in America is, and we'll be able to see how parks stack up on factors like investment, access, amenities, and acreage. And for the first time this year, we will also be taking a careful look at who does and who does not have access to parks in major cities. So we know that parks serve a vital function, and I'm eager to get to the conversation with the mayors. So again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. Now I want to bring in Mayor Schaaf. So all of us know that if you touch something hot, it burns. Well, if you touch something hotter than 111 degrees Fahrenheit, it'll burn your skin. If you have prolonged contact with something that's over 118 degrees, you can get second-degree burns in under 10 seconds. So around noon, in a sunny day in late October, 3 students stood in a tight circle at the International Community School in Oakland, California. What were they saying? 109, yelled one 5th grader named Emmanuel. He was pointing to a surface in the schoolyard. He walked over to the jungle gym and he aimed at the plastic slide, 115. As his classmate Angelica recorded the measurements on her clipboard, another student, 10-year-old David, studied a map of the schoolyard and then sprinted across the wide stretch of asphalt to the next spot to take a reading there. In the shade of the lone tree growing a few feet outside the fence line, he pointed to his device at the tree. What do you think he found? 72, he yelled. He was reading the thermometer's digital screen. So Mayor Schaaf is working to bring those cool trees inside the schoolyards rather than having them outside the fence. And I really appreciate your leadership on this, Mayor Schaaf. We're working with you, Green Schoolyards America, and the Oakland Unified School District to implement a green schoolyards approach throughout Oakland. We know that green schoolyards are a necessity. Schools are community hubs. 1 in 5 Californians actually visits a school every day. Oakland Unified School District has 122 schools on 505 urban acres. That is really precious land. So Mayor Schaaf knows how Oakland could benefit from more opportunities for children and communities to learn and thrive in healthy environments. In fact, we got to dedicate Oakland's newest green schoolyard last week at Cesar Chavez Education Center. This living green schoolyard removed 13,000 square feet of asphalt and replaced it with natural play areas, mini grass field, 58 new trees to help cool the playground and provide shade and seating areas for the students. It also has a bioswale designed to channel the stormwater runoff, which is fantastic, help make sure that debris and pollution gets filtered out before it gets emptied into the bay and into the oceans. There's a new outdoor schoolyard complete with an orchard, so kids can learn science right there in their own green schoolyard. So the city of Oakland worked with the Trust for Public Land to pass a ballot measure supported by a majority of people in Oakland to help pay for this work. And so during the height of the pandemic in April of 2020, Oakland also launched a Slow Streets program to support safe physical activity and alleviate overcrowding in parks and trails. Really wonderful work. Congratulations, Mayor Schaaf, and welcome to the conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
And I'd like to introduce Mayor Brown from Buffalo. Mayor Brown is one of the earliest endorsers of the campaign to make sure that everyone has a park within a 10-minute walk of home. And since 2006, Mayor Brown has invested $74 million in parks citywide. And he's worked to attract private funding for parks, including $50 million from the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation to build Centennial Park on Lake Erie, which is a waterfront in high need of green space for everyone. Mayor Brown's been an advocate for infrastructure for open space. He's dedicated more than $10 million to be used for parks, cultural institutions, and neighborhood centers. Mayor Brown's been a leader, and we're really privileged to work with the city to do a master plan to help make sure that we're thinking systematically, driven by data, about where parks and other infrastructure is needed. Lots of economic benefits, and I know, Mayor Brown, you're a champion of remarkable work to really spark a revival. It's been quite successful already in Buffalo. So Mayor Brown, welcome. We're really pleased to have you join the conversation.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you, and it's great to be part of this important conversation.
Yeah. So I want to start with a fun question for each of you. Tell me one of your favorite public spaces. And I'm pretty sure Mayor Schaaf is not going to mention something in Buffalo. So Mayor Schaaf, would you start? Tell me a favorite public space.
Well, I put it as my virtual background. It's Lake Merritt in Oakland. It actually was named as the first bird wildlife sanctuary in the United States. It's right on the edge of our downtown. The lake is about a little more than 3 miles around, and there's parks right all around it. A natural amphitheater where we celebrated the Golden State Warriors championship wins. And we have been investing a lot in this park. You know, I call it Oakland's living room. People from all over our city come to Lake Merritt. It's families, it's friends, it's popsicle vendors. It really is the soul of our city. It's a place where everyone feels welcome. And what feels so kind of magical to me about it, when you have a living room in your city, it reminds you that you are part of a family. And these public spaces are what connect us to a sense of community. The idea that everyone in our city is part of our family and that we have a mutual responsibility to one another. Now, I will say that during COVID, a lot of people showed up for Thanksgiving dinner, if you know what I mean. The park actually got kind of overwhelmed by love. And we actually had to do a little campaign about, stop loving on the lake quite so much. We need to give the lake a break. And so, sometimes your living room, gets a little crowded. And I'd be happy to talk later about how we pivoted and adjusted and tried to serve the many different constituents that love this lake, this open space, this green space right in the heart of our city.
Mayor Schaaf, thank you so much. I'm sure a lot of people are now going to want to visit Lake Merritt. Mayor Brown, tell us a favorite of yours, a favorite public space.
Thank you, Diane. And I want to say that Mayor Schaaf's park sounds absolutely gorgeous. I think I want to visit myself. One of my favorite park spaces in the city of Buffalo is Martin Luther King Park. It's in the inner city of Buffalo. It is a beautiful park. We have invested heavily in the park in the city of Buffalo. It has also received significant state investment, partnering with our colleagues in state government. It's the location where our Juneteenth celebration is held. Buffalo has one of the largest Juneteenth celebrations nationally and internationally. which we are very proud of. Big parade takes place that comes through the park, and there are talent shows and step shows and vendors and activity that attracts people not only from all across the region, but attracts people from across the country and attracts people internationally from Canada as well. So we're very proud of the Juneteenth parade that takes place in Martin Luther King Park. It's also the location for two very large jazz festivals. And again, these jazz festivals attract people from all across the country to Martin Luther King Park. So it's a very welcoming place. It's a warm place. We have one of the largest wading pools in the northeastern part of the United States in Martin Luther King Park, which I was able to invest over $4.5 million in when I came in as mayor. That wading pool had been unusable for about 30 years prior to that time. So the investment in restoring that pool, in opening that pool, literally every summer attracts people from all across the city to Martin Luther King Park. It is in a beautiful neighborhood, and it is part of our Olmsted Park system. We are very fortunate in Buffalo to have a park system that was designed by the noted landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted. So I'm very proud of that park. It's very close to where my family and I live. It is a place of gathering. It's a place for family. It's also, with all that activity, it's also a place of solitude. So it's a very beautiful park.
That's great. Wonderful. Thank you. Maybe we'll have a national holiday to be able to celebrate Juneteenth in Buffalo. So thank you. One of the things you mentioned about the water feature, the wading pool, we find in our data that people love having water features in their parks. And that's a really popular and an amenity that's growing in popularity. So when we release Park Score, we like to think about things like, are there places for people to play in the water? This issue of park quality, though, and making sure that when there's a wading pool, it hasn't been left fallow for 30 years, so people can actually use it. It's so important. So thank you so much for mentioning that. I'd like to bring us up to this year. It's been a tough year in so many ways for so many communities. And I'm curious, how do you think, how has the thinking changed for you and your city on how we think about parks, what approaches we take to parks and green space, and how we can reimagine some public spaces? And Mayor Brown, maybe I'll ask you to address this one first. How's our thinking different on parks going forward?
Well, when Katharine Lusk introduced the discussion today, and Diane, you as well, talked about the importance of equity. And I think how we think about parks is critically important to how we think about equity in our communities. One of the guiding principles for us in the city of Buffalo is improving the quality of life for all people. It's hard for people to have good quality of life if they don't feel that the allocation of resources is equitable. So we have substantially invested in parks in every section of the city of Buffalo so that people could get outside, so that they could enjoy outdoor amenities, so that they have beautiful amenities in neighborhoods that are close to them and places that they can walk to, that they can bike to. We saw during COVID-19, and you discussed this as well in your introduction, the importance of using park space and green space for people to be able to safely get outside and to be able to safely recreate. We closed some of the roads in parks in the city of Buffalo so people could safely spread out, so that they would have the room to be able to exercise and enjoy getting outside of the house as we were working hard to keep people safe from COVID-19. So from an equity perspective, from a perspective of improving housing values, from a quality of life perspective, from a health and safety perspective, the thinking about parks has really changed very dramatically. But when I think back to what Frederick Law Olmsted envisioned when he designed the Buffalo Park system as a way for people of all backgrounds, of all income levels, to be able to get out into the green space and enjoy themselves, enjoy nature, I think we've come back around to that kind of thinking as we look at our parks today.
Thank you. Mayor Schaaf, let me turn to you and ask, how has your thinking changed about what we need to do going forward based on what we've experienced in the last year?
I would say one of our big pivots was kind of repurposing existing spaces for park-like uses. And now I'm switching my background so you can see one of our slow streets. And talk about pivoting. My fantastic, can I just give a shout out of love to public servants, to the city workers and other government workers who just showed so much resilience, so much work ethic, so much creativity and nimbleness in this last year. It really, I'm so proud to be a public servant. And one of the things that we did in our city was we had just gone through a major bike route planning process. And so we had already identified which streets in the city were appropriate for bicycle boulevards. We took that data and immediately rolled out a plan for slow streets. And that means that we closed the streets to through traffic. Now, people are freaking out. Can I get my Amazon delivery? And it's like, yes, you can still drive on your street. The pizza truck can still deliver your pizza, don't worry, but no through traffic. The partial barriers slowed traffic down. And what we saw was our almost like asphalt parks. They're not as good as green parks, but they're a start. And, we even had some neighborhoods start to replace those traffic cones. And let me just say, talk about nimbleness. This first slow streets were put out over one weekend, literally with just the typical sawhorses and orange cones that we had on hand. They literally, my mobility director grabbed some interns. They borrowed my minivan and
Wow.
loaded the sawhorses into them and ran around the city putting them up. So, nothing like, just resilience and creativity and let's not make it perfect, but let's make it good. But we actually saw people start to replace those ugly sawhorses and orange cones with planter boxes. Some of our slow streets are delineated by these mini planter boxes that serve as neighborhood herb gardens. But to see streets liberated from the dominance of cars, to see them become a place of community gathering where families could get outside and scooter and ride bikes and do it in a safe way during this pandemic. And I will tell you, people are demanding that these slow streets remain as a permanent fixture. In fact, we're actually getting requests still for new ones, even as, our city is about 2/3 vaccinated now. California has just had a phenomenal turnaround.
Once people get outside, they want to keep doing it.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's great. And thank you for sharing that photo too. I want to ask one more question, then we're going to go to questions. They're stacking up from our audience and getting more and more people signed in. So we want to get to those. But I'd love to hear from each of you just a little bit about how you see the changes you'd like to make in parks and green space line up with other goals you have for your city, like health goals, equity goals, climate. We know that parks reduce temperature, help reduce flooding. We know that parks help increase safety. We know that parks help increase overall community health. And I'm just curious, as your city is thinking about this, how do you see parks in those other realms as one of the tools? And Mayor Schaaf, maybe I'll turn to you first.
Sure. One neat thing that we've seen is a connection between our parks, because it's around, health, wellness, and even food security. So often our kids that don't have access to green spaces are disconnected from where food comes from. What are their responsibilities as environmental stewards? One of my favorite food stories is a high school in deep East Oakland, one of our most stressed neighborhoods. And they literally ripped out a whole bunch of the asphalt in their playground and planted a fruit orchard. And not only are the children learning about nutrition, they actually have a chef that comes onto the school. They do cooking classes with the food that they're growing there. They even took what used to be, I can't believe this, at a high school, a rifle range that had originally been built, an indoor rifle range for the ROTC. They've converted it to a fab lab and an indoor hydroponics farm. So they're growing all sorts of food. They're learning about how to prepare it, what its nutritional value is. They've even started a little farmer's market. That kind of transformation of connecting people to the earth. The other thing that I'll say is, we are a coastal city, and the threat of sea level rise is real. And that's another place where parks, and you mentioned bioswales, that's a term that I bet a lot of Americans don't even know what it means. But the idea of creating green spaces for our water to get filtered, to adapt as we're having these extreme storms, as sea level is rising, this is another piece of our adaptation challenge in this moment, as we have got to take climate change seriously before it's too late.
Thank you. Mayor Brown, how do you think about the overlap in issues and how you build parks in as a solution to some of these other strategic challenges that cities are facing?
So in Buffalo, we have followed a place-based community development and economic development strategy. We see our parks as an important center of place in our neighborhoods, and important community centers, if you will. So we have invested heavily in parks. You, in your introduction, you mentioned $70 million in investment. We're almost at $100 million in investment. And the total investment from the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation in parks in Buffalo is about $100 million. So to improve the quality of life, we have used parks as an important center where we invest in streets and sidewalks and bike lanes leading to parks so that they're more walkable. We have focused on the intensity of lighting leading into our parks, in our parks, to have people feel safe. Our parks are open until 10 o'clock in the evening in the city of Buffalo. So we want people to use them 7 days a week. We want them to use them during the full period of time that they're open. We want them to feel safe and comfortable in our parks. We also have focused on economic development projects in close proximity to some of our parks, but because we found those kinds of investments in parks and green space have been very attractive to developers doing certain development projects. And like Mayor Schaaf, we have invested in community gardens. So in areas close to our parks where we've had vacant land, we've worked with the community to set up community gardens. And in some cases, the gardens are the gateways to some of our parks. So we think our parks are important not only for community development, they've been important for economic development for us as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn now to questions from the audience, and it looks like the Zoom technology is allowing upvoting, which is great. So if you see somebody else's question that you really like, I'll try to ask the questions that are of most interest to the audience. So the first question I have comes from Heather Hoffman. Heather, thank you. So the question is, how do we change a mindset that thinks nothing of cutting down trees, including very large ones, because we can always just plant new ones? How do we make the default setting be keeping the trees we already have? How do we make public officials and developers see existing trees as the tremendous asset they are, instead of a nuisance, as too many of them do now? Who'd like to jump in on that one? Mayor Brown?
Yes, in Buffalo, our city charter doesn't allow for the cutting down of healthy trees in the city of Buffalo. So that is something that we resist. That's something that we avoid. And by law in the city of Buffalo, we do not remove healthy trees. In 2006, we had a surprise October snowstorm that unfortunately brought down a lot of healthy trees in the city of Buffalo, and working with a number of community and corporate partners, we have been replanting trees throughout the city of Buffalo. But I think it's important legislatively to protect trees, and that is what we have done in the city charter in the city of Buffalo.
Thank you. Mayor Schaaf, would you like to comment on this one?
I'll chime in, since our city is named for a tree, Oakland, and oaks are kind of treated as sacred in our city. They actually enjoy special protections in Oakland. But just, this is our responsibility as cities. We hold the power of land use regulation. And so tree protection is something that should be integrated into land planning and regulation practices. And if you can't get it done on a local level, I think people should look at the state or federal level.
Thank you so much. So the next question comes from Ryan O'Malley. Ryan, thank you for your question. So many urban communities are overly burdened by environmental contamination from past industry. Often these sites are paved over, which exacerbates the heat island effect in our communities. Should federal and state brownfield and Superfund laws be changed to enable government to hold historic polluters and property owners financially responsible for the remediation and greening of these sites? And before I turn to the mayors, I'll just express that the Trust for Public Land is committed to closing the park equity gap. And we do find this when we're building parks in different parts of the country, working with communities to dream what they want their community to look like. We always test, and we do sometimes find contamination, and making sure that gets cleaned up is an important part of really bringing these cities, these communities up to the standard of the dreams that they've got. So the putting in green space is sometimes a little more complicated than people realize. But Mayor Schaaf, any perspective on whether the laws need to change to give the city more ability to hold polluters responsible?
They absolutely need to be stronger. Now, there is a foundation. I know we've been successful, especially through the entity that originally polluted the land may be gone, but their insurance company is still there. And so we've had some success actually litigating against those insurance companies to get funds to help remediate spaces. But that's also where the science of remediation could use some advancement. One of my favorite projects, it's a TPL project. It's called Union Point Park in Oakland. And it was built on a brownfield, a very contaminated site. And one of the barriers was, you have to remediate that pollution. Originally, we thought we'd have to actually truck all the contaminated soil to one of these deposits. And is that really doing our jobs? And so we did a lot of creative remediating as part of the park design, either through mounds, planting certain types of plants that actually pull pollutants out of the soil over time. It's a waterfront park, and so the risk of those pollutants flowing into the water was huge. So I also think that the science to actually make remediation less expensive and better is also an important part of this conversation, in addition to strengthening the regulations.
Thank you. Mayor Brown, would you like to add anything on that one?
Yeah, I agree that federal laws to hold polluters responsible for polluting the environment must be stronger. Buffalo is an old industrial city, so our local ordinances require us, when we are building projects, to replace a certain amount of fill to make sure that projects are safe, that there is environmental testing. We also have worked closely with the state of New York. They have a brownfield opportunity area program where the state has provided resources, technical assistance for the remediation of brownfield opportunity areas. We have a number of those in the city of Buffalo. And so I think federal support and state support for municipalities in this area is critically important.
When cities are green and clean and safe, people really want to move to cities. And so making sure this is dealt with, I know, is something that's on you all's desk all the time. So thank you. So the next question comes from Sherry Ron. So what's the mayor's sense of forecast for funding for parks? Given their ability to multitask as critical public infrastructure, my hope is the stimulus money will be an opportunity. Mayor Brown?
Well, I think the stimulus money is definitely an opportunity. We're still waiting for the guidelines to be published. And, you know, different communities are in different places. We have invested heavily in parks for many years in the city of Buffalo. We have a historic park system that's nationally and internationally recognized. And one of the great values in our city is to protect parkland and green space. But for communities that perhaps have not had the resources to invest as heavily in parks and green space, particularly to improve quality of life and to address equity issues, I think the stimulus does provide a significant opportunity to be able to make those kinds of investments.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Mayor Schaaf?
Yes, yes, yes. And this is a really historical moment. Not only do we have a whole new awareness of the importance of parks, I think many of us, parks were the only things that kept us sane during this crazy last year, this tragic last year. Parks and outdoor spaces is what kept us healthy, what kept us being able to see each other safely. And I know for myself, just as far as keeping my mental state healthy, I couldn't have done it without access to beautiful, clean, healthy outdoor spaces. So that awareness is there. And we have, for these 2 years, a break in the partisan gridlock that has characterized Washington, D.C. for far too long. And no matter which party you belong to, at least you can say there is not gridlock. We're seeing historic proposals, funding levels that we have not seen for decades. So let us take this opportunity, absolutely advocate for parks as essential infrastructure. I know Congress is literally writing this bill right now. This is our chance, and it's our chance to tie it to a new concern for climate change. So it really has so many benefits, much more awareness, and finally an opportunity to do something monumental at the federal funding level.
Thank you. And as I mentioned at the top, we're so excited for the progress on the Parks, Jobs, and Equity Act that is supported by Republicans and Democrats, co-sponsored by both, and the opportunity to move forward with an investment in parks to really help close that park divide. It is a once in a lifetime opportunity. So thank you. So I love all the questions coming in. We have quite a few stacked up. Encourage folks though to keep putting questions in. Look over the questions that are in the Q&A. If there's one you want to make sure gets answered, I think you can upvote it. And I'm trying to take the questions that are the most of interest to our audience. So thank you all. I have a question from Lisa Lavina. Curious, how do cities plan for construction of tall buildings while trying to keep trees in the environment? Is this part of the planning board conversation? And I know a number of cities are thinking about shade and all the other issues that you face with tall buildings. Can you explain to the audience, Mayor Brown, how does your city deal with that?
We, over a extended period of time, developed what is called the Buffalo Green Code. It is our zoning code completely rewritten for the city of Buffalo. We developed the Green Code a few years ago after about 5 years of study and planning. We were one of 3 cities at the time in the nation that fully revised our zoning code to take into consideration the importance of green space, the importance of trees, the importance of park space in the development process. One of the reasons that we called it the Green Code, worked very closely with citizens, thousands of responses and input from the community in developing the code, and that really helps to protect green space, reduces the ability to remove trees and to not have green space associated with different projects in the city of Buffalo. And so I would recommend that the framer of that question look up the Buffalo Green Code, and they would be able to get more information about the process that the city of Buffalo used to protect green space, trees in the city in our development process.
Great.
I think the question raises a really great point, and I'll just add to what Mayor Brown said. I love roof gardens, and to advance the technology about making roof gardens easy, known as far as the weight. We did have one big project in San Francisco where there was a whole like elevated park, and the weight of it ended up being a little more than the structure could take. It had to quickly be re-engineered a little bit. So as we advance the knowledge around roof gardens, I think that is a really important part of the urban skyline and landscape that we really have got to double down on.
And those roof gardens can play a really important role in keeping cities cooler and absorbing floodwater, so you end up with cleaner water, a cooler city, and a great roof garden to visit. So thanks for bringing that up. So we have time for one more question from the audience, and then I'm going to need to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for such thoughtful questions. So here's the last question from Marielle. Wondering how ecosystem services and native biodiversity conservation factor into your consideration, especially as historically marginalized communities have smaller parks and more depopulated nature and weedier species. Mayor Schaaf?
I'm not embarrassed to admit I do not know what depopulate nature means.
How about we just focus on the question of what about native plants?
We absolutely do. We have a lot of policies that prefer native plants. We have a big issue here with eucalyptus trees, which were planted by people that wanted to log them for paper and lumber, and they're very invasive and they are very flammable. And I don't know if anyone has followed California's wildfire season, but it has been a doozy. And so that knowledge about natives, and that certainly goes into when we plant, it also goes into the education that we do for our young people. And this idea of taking our parks and what we do in them and making that part of our educational system. It's not only creating our climate and earth stewards of the future, but it really is encouraging their ability to learn all subjects because it's so visceral, it's so tangible. So I think the idea of natives and invasives is important. I personally have pulled out a lot of blackberries along the creek in my neighborhood as part of a restoration process there. So absolutely that needs to be part of what we're doing.
Thank you. Mayor Brown?
In Buffalo, we haven't had a real big problem with invasive plants. We have a forestry department in the city of Buffalo that we have expanded. Our forestry department is part of our Division of Public Works. Our Deputy Commissioner of Public Works, Andy Rabb, who we are very proud of, is the former city forester in Prospect Park in Brooklyn and New York City. So part of what we've also tried to do is aggressively recruit people to our forestry department that have exceptional knowledge in plant species, in green space, in water and other areas of conservation that have helped us make intelligent investments in our parks and green space in the city of Buffalo.
Oh, that's wonderful. So I'm going to give you each a chance to do an elevator pitch to another mayor who doesn't believe in parks. And all right, you've got a 30-story building, riding up the elevator. What do you say to convince another mayor to follow your lead in investments in parks? Mayor Brown?
What we've seen with investments in parks is the ability to attract more residents to the city of Buffalo, the ability to attract more homeowners. We've also seen property values increase in our city. And because we believe we've been able to attract more homeowners, more property owners, we've also been able to reduce residential and commercial tax rates in the city of Buffalo to make Buffalo an even more attractive place to live, work, and invest in a business.
Fantastic. Mayor Schaaf?
Beautiful green public spaces are not just good for economic development because they are an asset that residents today expect and look for, but they really are an investment in resilience. And resilience, not just in an environmental way, which we know parks and green spaces give us cleaner air. They give us a way to absorb rainfall and unusual storms, but they also create resilience in that they build community. These are the places where people come together, where they build bonds with one another as a city and also form a love, a loyalty to your city. Parks are what define and give personality to your city. And that is what is going to keep your city strong, resilient, and prosperous. And most importantly, healthy for generations to come.
Well, I think everybody is convinced by those two elevator pitches. Thank you so much. And thank you both for your leadership on green space. And it's been wonderful to talk with you. And we love partnering with you to help make your cities greener, help close the park divide. And I want to thank Boston University's Initiative on Cities and the Menino Survey provides so much insight. Just encourage everybody listening to take a look at the survey, take a look at the data, and share it with your friends and neighbors. So thank you both. Really appreciate it, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks for the